And now we're on Daf Samach Gimel Amid Beis. And the Gemara says, Ella, no, we have to reinterpret our Mishnah. When he says Al Manashi Yirtza Abba, what he means is Al Manashi Yishtok Abba, meaning on the condition that the father doesn't express his veto, his disapproval of the marriage, when he hears about the marriage. And therefore, when he's Makadesh Al Manas, Shalo Yisnaged Ha'abba L'Kiddushin, when the Mishnah says Rotza Ab Mekudesh, it doesn't mean that the father has to explicitly express his approval of the marriage, but rather, in the absence of a protest, of an expression of disapproval, the Kiddushin will be Chal. And when it says Im Lav Eina Mekudeshes, it means Im Lav that he didn't make a Mecha. And therefore, we can understand the Mitziasa of the Mishnah. If the father dies before he gets a chance to express his approval, the Kiddushin is Chal nevertheless, because he never protested and he never expressed his disapproval. So Gemara says you're okay now with the Reisha and the Mitziasa, but you're in trouble with the Seifa. Ema Seifa, how are we going to understand the Seifa? Mesa Ben. If the husband himself, the Makadesh, dies before the father expressed his interest, is Velabnenes Avloma in a Rotzen. We have to encourage the father to disapprove of the marriage, because otherwise the marriage will be Chal, and with the death of the Makadesh shall fall for Yibum. Is Amai. I don't get it. Vashosik. During the lifetime of the son, he was Shosek. And if he was Shosek, then the Kiddushin is Chal. So what good is it if he disapproves posthumously after the son dies? There's nothing of any validity here. Ella, says the Gemara, no. The Seif is talking about a totally different case. Sha'omar lo, the Makadesh says to the Isha al-Manasha lo yimcha Abba, I'm marrying you on the condition that your father does not disapprove. That's a double negative. Let's say it this way. On the condition that your father does not make a mecha. And therefore, even after the death of the son, the father could make a mecha and be oker the Kiddushin. Because the son never set up a time period within which the father has to be mocha and protest in order to invalidate the Kiddushin. And therefore, at any time whatsoever, the father could make a mecha and completely undermine and invalidate the Kiddushin. And therefore, even after the death of the son, he could still invalidate the Kiddushin by expressing his mecha. But if, on the other hand, the father died and he didn't make a mecha, then she is mekudeshes, right? Because it was almanash lo yimcha abba, mekudeshes, because he didn't make a mecha. So if the son dies, again, let's go over this, then by guaranteeing that the father will make a mecha, he's going to undermine the Kiddushin through his mecha. In the Reisha, when the person said, I'm marrying you, Al-Manashi Yishtok Aviv, if the father doesn't make a mecha at the beginning, then Mikudeshes. So, Frek the Gemara, what's going on over here? Now you tell me that the Reisha is talking about one set of circumstances and the Sefer a different set of circumstances? Reisha Bechad Taima, Mitziyasa, V'Sefer Bechad Taima. We're going to separate the Reisha from the Mitziyasa and the Sefer. Why? Because in the Reisha, we're saying that he was Makadesh her with a Tanai of Sheyishtok Abba, as long as the father doesn't disapprove and he is silent. Whereas the Mitzia, in a case where the father died before he made a Mecha, or in the Sefer where the son died before the father made a Mecha, that's a different time, and it's a whole different scenario than the Reisha. It means that he was Mekadesh of Itnai Shalo Yimcha Abba, whereas in the Reisha he said he was Mekadesh on the Tanai Sheyishto. Rav Yanai says, you know what? That's fine. You have the green light to go ahead and interpret the Mishnah as referring to two different scenarios in which he recited the Tanai. In the Reisha, the Tanai was Sheyishto Ka'av, and the Mitzvah in the Sefer, the Tanai was Shalo Yimcha Ha'av. Reish Lakish, Reish Lakish says that from the fact that Rabbi Yanai preferred to interpret the Mishnah as referring to two different cases, when in truth Rabbi Yanai could have said that the Mishnah is talking about only one case of Almanashi Yirtza Abba, but it expresses the opinion of two different Tanoim. Is Shmami? No, we derive from that to be the Rabbi Yanai Dachkina Mukminim Aslisa B'Trei Taima Val Liba Dechad Tam V'Lo Mukminim B'Trei Taima B'Chad Tam. So if we have two options, which is the lesser of two evils, so to speak, you could break up the Mishnah into two different ta'amim, two different explanations and scenarios, but it's all one Tana. Alternatively, you could say that the entire Mishnah from the beginning to the end is referring to the same identical scenario, Chad Taima, but it expresses the opinion of two different Tanoim. Rabbi Yanai says that the rule of thumb that operates with regard to interpreting Mishnayos is to avoid introducing two different Tanoim, even if it means that you have to split the Mishnah into two different scenarios. Comes along Rav Yosef Bar Ami, and he wants to reinterpret the Mishnah and reconcile the Reisha and the Sefer. It's really one scenario, and it's one Tana. No machlokas. What does the Makadish mean when he says Almanash Yirtza Abba? He means Almanash Shelo Yimcha Abba Mikan V'Ad Shloshim Yom. What he meant to say was that during the upcoming period of time of 30 days, father will not make a protest. So the Reisha says that if the father wants the Kiddushin, then she's Mekudeshes, meaning he didn't make a Macha. And that absence of a Macha took place within a period of 30 days. So 30 days went by without a Macha, and therefore the Kiddushin is Chal. If, on the other hand, Lo Ratza Av, Einu Mekudeshes, it means that within the 30 days he made a Macha. And the Mitziyasa is talking about a case where the father died, and the Kiddushin is Chal, because after he dies, so for sure he's not going to make a Macha. He can't make a Macha if he's dead. And therefore the Kiddushin will not be bottled. And in the Sefer, if the son dies, then the father can make a Macha within the 30 days, even though initially when he heard about it, he was Shosin. So if the son dies within 30 days of the Masechet Kiddushin, then we teach the father to be Mocha and to be Mavat the Kiddushin so that she shouldn't fall for Yibam. And this leads us to the Mishnah here on the first half of Samach Gimel Amud Beis. Kidashti is Biti. A father has certain special status with regard to being believed. And the Torah says, as Biti Nasati Lishazeh in Parshas Kitetze, and that means that he's believed to say that he married off his daughter. But if he doesn't tell us who the Makadish was, from whom he accepted Kiddushin, then we're in trouble. If I ever knew, I certainly forgot, and she's an Eishesish, she can't marry anybody because anybody might be somebody other than the husband. But now we have to ask a different question. Is somebody believed to come forward and say, well, I was the one who's Makadish? Neman. Now, we're not sure exactly why Neman. There are two possibilities. One is to say Neman, he's believed, because why shouldn't we believe him? I mean, no one else is claiming that he was the Makadish. By default, we should believe him. Another way of saying it is that we believe him because he has the chutzpah to say in front of the father, I was the Makadish. And if the father doesn't recognize him, and doesn't know him from Adam, then for sure the father's going to get up and say, go jump in the lake. You certainly were not the Makadish. So therefore, if he had the chutzpah to say so, we have to believe him. Now the Mishnah continues. What happens if we have two suitors, so to speak, two claimants, each one saying, I was the Makadish? We don't know who to believe. Father can't tell us. She'll need a get to get married from both of them, because it's a suffix whether she's Mekadesh to Reuven or to Shimon. However, if Reuven wants to give her the get, then she can marry Shimon, or vice versa. In Rotzu, echad nosen get ve'echad konis. Omar Rav says that the din of our Mishnah, that a man who says, I married her as Neman, oh, no. Neman litin la get, v'eno Neman lichnos. We're not going to allow him to marry her. We're going to allow her to marry anyone else she wants to marry. Now, Rav has to explain himself. Either you believe him or you don't believe him. How can you split it and say, well, we believe him to allow her to get married to someone else, presumably if she gets a gift from him, but we don't believe him to the extent that we can allow the consummation of this marriage. So Rav explains, Neman litain get, we believe him that he was the Makadesh, so that if he gives her a get, she can marry someone else. We have a principle that a person doesn't lie, fabricate the truth, if he doesn't gain any benefit from it. What benefit does he get by giving her a get and allowing her to marry someone else? But to marry her, well, here he's got vested interests. Why? Because maybe she was married to someone else, but we don't know who that someone else is, and therefore he sees it as a perfect opportunity to get married to this woman, even though she's married to someone else. And Emo Yitzro Tokfa, his Yetzer Hara was so powerful to marry this woman, even though she's an Eishes Ish. Therefore, he came up and he identified himself as the Makadesh, which was a fabrication of the truth. Again, if he gives her a get, then he has no benefit whatsoever. Rav Asi disagrees with Rav. Omar Af Nemen Lichnos. If you're believing him to identify himself as the Makadesh, then you have to believe him to allow a consummation of that marriage. And Rav Asi apparently has a special reason why we believe him and we're not choshish that his Yetzer got the better of him. And that is because he realizes that if he's lying through his teeth, the father is going to identify that lie, and he's going to throw him on his head. He must be telling the truth. Now we switch it around. It wasn't the father who said he married her off, but she herself comes forward. She has a cheskes pnuya, and she says that I received Kiddushin, but I don't know from whom. Because in this case, the father wasn't in the picture, and the entire svara of Rav Asi to believe the person who identifies himself as the Makadesh falls by the wayside, because there's no father here who's going to know that he's lying and ain't on the maze. And not only that, it could be that she is to some extent is in cahoots with this guy, and she doesn't want to be an aguna for the rest of her life because we don't know who the Makadesh is. So you know what? She says, yeah, he's the Makadesh. So here Rav Asi says, no, we can't believe him. There's no proof or umdana or hochachet studies as a bureau to establish his credibility. So Gemara Sakasha on Rav. Tanan in our Mishnah says that if two people are both vying for the same woman, each one claiming I was Makadesh, Ratzu echad nosen get, v'echad kones is Tuv to the Rav. According to Rav, we said that we're afraid the Yetzer Hara got the best of him, and therefore he's not believed to be kones. But here it says beferish explicitly, when there are two people vying, then one of them is allowed to marry if the other one gives a get. Rav Shani Hasa, that's different. Since there are two people, both of whom are claiming Aniki Dashtiya, Irtuse Mirtas. The one who's lying is surely, even according to Rav in this scenario, afraid that the father is going to know that this guy is not the Makadesh, whereas the other one is. So you have two people in front of the father, each one saying Aniki Dashtiya. The father is going to be able to know which of the two received which of the two from whom is the one from whom he received Kiddushin. And therefore, in this case, if one of them drops out by giving her a get, the other one can be Makadesh her because we believe that he wouldn't try to get away with it in the presence of the father. Tanya Kavasi de Ravasi, we have a brisa that supports Ravasi. A man says, Kidashti is biti. I married off my daughter who's a katana. V'eni yodel mi kidashtiu ba echad v'yomer kidashtia. Af neman lichnos, explicitly like Rav, that we believe him not only to give her a get, but even to marry her himself. Knasa, if that person who identified himself as the Mekadesh married her, now she has a chazaka of an Eishes Ish to this first one. The second one is now coming to undermine the Cheskes Eishes Ish. Lo kol heimenu liosrolo. He does not have the power and the authority and the credibility to generate an Isser on someone who's already an Eishes Ish, and she has a chazaka to be married to someone. However, her Isha Shomer is Kadashi. Now we flip it around. She's the one who says, I received Kiddushin. I was the one who married her. Is Ein Neman Lichnos. Here's a case where even Rav Asi would agree that he's not believed. And why is that? Because maybe she wants to get married to him. I mean, better than not being married to anybody. Mipnei shehi mechapa olav. In other words, even though he's lying through his teeth, and she realizes full well that he's not the Mekadesh, because she would recognize him if he was the one who gave her Kiddushin, nevertheless, she's going to cover up for him. And she's going to say, yeah, he was the Mekadesh. So therefore, Rav Asi only said that if the father says, I don't know who is Mekadesh, then we have a svara, a real push to believe the person who says Aniki Dashtia, because he wouldn't be made as part of in front of the father. But if the woman is the one who says, I accept the Kiddushin, here, his statement, I was the Mekadesh, is not Neman. He doesn't have credibility because we're afraid that she'll be Mechap on his sheker. The Gemara raised the following suffix. Ma'u liskol al yod. When a father says, I was Mekadesh my daughter, Li Adam Mesuyam, okay, I'm reading from the footnote here. So he identifies the Mekadesh. Now, if somebody else has a relationship with her, is she Chayav Skila, or is he Chayav Skila? To what extent is the father believed? Perhaps the father's only believed Li Isurim, to create Isurim, but not as far as a chiyuv, a capital punishment, is concerned. And on this we have machlokus between Rav and Ravasi again, not necessarily connected to the original machlokus that we had earlier between Rav and Ravasi. Rav Omer in Soklin, we can believe the father to the extent in which she cannot get married without getting a get from this guy. But if someone else has a relationship with her, we cannot give skila. Maybe she's not married. Ravasi Omer Soklin. Ravasi is very consistent. If you believe the father, then believe him all the way. Rav Omer ain't Soklin. Ki hemnei rachmana. When the Torah says this, biti nosati, shall say the father is believed to marry off his daughter, right? Is ki hechi hemnei rachmana. To what extent did the Torah says he's believed as biti nosati? Le isura, only to generate an isur as if she were an Eishes Ish. But l'ktola, to mechayev misa based on his claim, lo mehemnei. We need two Eidim for a capital punishment. And the Torah never believed him to generate a chiyuv skila. So he says here beautifully, in the name of Rabbi Cheskel Abramsky, that Nemanis ha'av eno birur gomor shel ha'emes, el kmo adam neman lesars atzma midin shavya nafshich hatich l'isura. There's certain nemanos, as far as the isurim are concerned, even though it's not objectively credible or totally credible. So the Torah gave nemanis to the father vis-a-vis his daughter to say she's mekudeshes, but ein hargenes ha'adam al pi odas atzmo kach ein tzoklenes ha'abas al pi divrei ha'am. For Rav Asi Omar Soklin, we're going to go all the way. Shekula milsa hemni lekula milsa hemni rachmana la'av. The Torah believed the father straight across the board to establish that she is an Eishes Ish with all the repercussions. Amar Rav Asi Modina, I will concede to Rav that there is a situation in which there's only nemonis for Isur but not for Skila. And what's that? That's her Shavya Nafsha. Be'omeres niskadashti. She comes forward and says, I received Kiddushin. She's believed to aser herself on anyone in the world, but ain't so good. If a person would have a relationship, he doesn't get Skila. And the Gemara is going to explain why. Biyoma Rav Asi explains his own logic. Hani shmaitito didi, miravsan igri. When you look at my two statements and you compare them at first glance, they seem to be miravsan igri, mishavros gagos. They break roofs, which is a phrase that's used to explain a stira. Hashta, and now he introduces a kal v'chomer to slug himself up, and then he'll reconcile. Uma b'moko. Let's say the father says Kiddushi is piti, but I don't know to who. Somebody comes forward and says he's the Mekadesh. Is the halacha is in ba lichnos. Kones, if this person who identified himself as the Mekadesh comes forward and he wants to marry her, then we'll allow him to marry her. That was Rav Asi's sheet against Rav. It means that even though the father established that there was a Mekadesh, it's not a total chazaka. And therefore, somebody could come along and say that he was a Mekadesh. Amrit, Soklin. And yet Rav Asi holds that if she had a relationship with another man, she gets skila for that because of the father's claim that Kidashti is Piti. So imagine, in a case where the chazaka that's established and generated by the father's statement, by his testimony that a Kidashti is Piti, is not a complete nemonis. Haraya, we believe someone to come forward and say, I was the Mekadesh, and then we'll be mater her based on his get. And yet, Soklin al Yoda, we can give skila based on the father's statement that she's an Eishes Ish. Is therefore, now comes the kal v'chomer b'makom, in the case where she herself says this Kadashti, she doesn't know who the Mekadesh was, and now a person comes along and says that he was the one who was Mekadesh. We were machmir, and we said, Ein, we don't believe him, and I should say we don't believe him totally, in Baal Lichnos Ein Kones, to such an extent that he wants to marry her, we're not going to allow him to marry her, because it was only her, only she was the one who says this Kadash. Is Enodin Shesokli. In other words, how much more so in this case, if she has nus, then certainly there should be skila. Because here we're not going to be matter to anyone without an absolute proof that he was the Mekadesh. We're not going to allow the Mekadesh to marry her. So you see that there's even a greater assumption that she's a married woman, and certainly, therefore, she should be sokli. So Rav Asi is asking himself a self-reflexive kasha. How can I tell you that this kadashti, but any odea me, and he comes forward, is ein sokli. Kal v'chomer, there should be skill. If there's skill in the case where the father says kidashti is piti v'eni odea me, then how much more so should there be skila in the case where she says this kadash? But now I'll explain my logic. And al pi emes, this is not a kash at all. La'av, when the father says, I was Mekadesh my daughter, hemne rachmana, the Torah believes the father totally, completely, from A to Z, and therefore soklin al yod. However, Lidida, when she herself says that she was Niskadashi, Lohem, the Torah did not believe her totally. Again, she's Nemenes Alatzma, Midin Shavya Nafshi. But therefore, ain't Soklin Osal Pidvarel. Because in Dini Nefashos, we're not going to kill someone if there's even a a shred of a doubt. Again, she's nemenes lesser as atzmo migdin eshes ish because adam yochel lesser b'dibur al atzmo shavya nafshi. And if a person says that he was Makadisha, he's not Rashoy Lisosa, as we said before, because he's not afraid of a sheker. He's not afraid of lying. Rav Chizda Omar, Rav Chizda accepted the sheet of Rav, Echad Zevi, Echad Zeh, Ein Soklin Osa. Whether it's the father who says Kidashti is Piti, or whether she herself says his Kadashti, there's no skila in the case of Znus. The Azda Rav Chizda L'tameh. Rav Chizda is very consistent that a father is not believed for skila to say that he married off his daughter. Tiyom Rav Chizda b'ni zeh teisha shalom yom echad. Now we're talking about a case where a person, a father, identifies his son as Roy Labia. What's Roy Labia? Teisha shalom yom echad. Which would mean that if, let's say, an Eishes Ish or another Ereva would have a relationship with this 9-year-old boy, then all the punishments would apply. Based on what? Based on the statement of the father identifying his son as a 9-year-old. Or alternatively, Biti Zuba Shalasham V'yecha. A woman is Re'uya Labia from the age of 3 and a day. And the father identifies this daughter as 3 and a day. And therefore, let's say a person would have beer with her. Then, if let's say it was an erva and he was a shogeg, he would have to bring a karma for the chi of kares b'shogeg. Is neman lekarban. So the father's neman goes only as far as carbon is concerned. Carbon is considered like isur. Avalo le malchus v'lo la'onshin. But not as far as a chi of malchus is concerned, if it was mezid, or a chi of onshin. Now here I have to call up Masifta. This is, Rabbi, this is not relevant so much to you, but the Masifta made a mistake over here. There's Poshet a toe sofer here. I'll read to you. He says, Makis be ofishaisa be asura be iser losa se b'shogeg. That's a bad mistake. It should say b'mezid, not b'shogeg. So I don't know if you have any connection with the editor of Masifta. If you do, put me in touch with him, because I want him to correct this mistake in the future printing of Masechet Kiddushin Chelik Dal. Okay, so again, we see clearly that Rav Chizda makes this distinction. We give the father nemonis for Isur, but we don't go as far as corporeal punishments, whether it's makis in the case of Mezid, in a violation of a lav, or Misa in the case of a violation of a chi of Misa. And Tanya Kavasi de Rav Chizda, we have a brisa that supports, this is a Tosefta in Taras, Perik Vov, with regard to a Ben or a Bas that have already manifested 2 saros, but we don't know if they have gadlus, if they have shonim. We don't know their age. And the father comes along and he says, B'ni zeh, ben shloshes rei shonim yom echad. Not only does he have saros, but he has shonim. Or biti zu bash temes rei shonim yom echad. And therefore she has the status of a Gedol L'chol Dovar. And here we'll finish up for today on Daf Samach Daled Amud Aleph. Nemon, the father's belief for Isurim. What does that mean for Isurim? L'nedarim, if the son or the father or the daughter took a neder. L'charomim, if they were magdish, then a chasim b'loshem cherem, it's chal. Like deshos, if they were magdish something to Bedek Habayis. La'arochim, if he or she said erki olai. Avalo lemalchus. Here he got it right. Avalo lemalchus. He write him avru beisur losaseh. He means b'mezid. V'chein leonshim, and also for a chi of misa. And this leads us to the Mishnah on Daf Siyata Dishmaya, which we need a lot of these days, as we hear one plane after the other. Okay, then. So let me wish you a great day. Thank you so much.